The WNBA currently stands at a decisive crossroads, navigating the turbulent waters of collective bargaining while simultaneously managing an influx of attention that is statistically unprecedented in the history of the league. For the first time since its inception, the organization has witnessed a surge in attendance, swelling to 2 or even 2.5 times its previous capacity. This is not merely a gradual incline. It is a sudden tectonic shift in viewership, driven largely by the arrival of Caitlin Clark. She acts as the primary gravitational force, pulling in a demographic of spectators who, until now, had remained on the periphery of women's professional basketball. Now, however, a new and volatile situation has emerged in Minnesota involving Immigration and Customs Enforcement known as ICE. This development has catalyzed a rhetorical clash that threatens to alienate the very fan base that has breathed new life into the league's economy. The discourse has been ignited by specific figures within the sport: DiJonai Carrington, Natisha Heidemann, and notably Cheryl Reeve, who have chosen to utilize their platform to engage in vociferous political activism. This is not a passive disagreement, it is an active confrontation. The criticism leveled against them is not born of malice, but of a refusal to accept the normalization of political vitriol within a space designated for entertainment. There is a tangible cost to this opposition. In the digital ecosystem of content creation, challenging the prevailing narrative can result in the immediate loss of subscribers, a metric that serves as the lifeblood of independent media. Yet the integrity of the stance remains paramount. The loss of 36 subscribers is a temporary fluctuation. History suggests that when the season begins and the first whistle blows, the audience returns, drawn back by the unyielding gravity of the truth. The friction intensified following the actions of Breanna Stewart, the vice president of the WNBPA and a co-founder of the specialized league known as Unrivaled. It appears that the cessation of Unrivaled's business operations was not a sufficient conclusion for Stewart. She sought to punctuate the moment with a definitive political statement. In a league that already struggles to capture a massive audience, drawing viewership numbers that hover around 80,000 and often appearing to exist on life support, the decision to inject divisive political theater feels less like activism and more like self-sabotage. It is akin to unplugging a patient that is already struggling to breathe. Before a game that ended in a narrow 76-71 victory over the Vinyl, Stewart positioned herself at the forefront of the discourse, displaying a sign that read, "Abolish ICE." This was not a subtle gesture. It was a calculated visual broadcast intended to override the athletic context of the evening. In her post-game statements, Stewart framed her actions through the lens of moral superiority, citing a disgust with the current news cycle and a desire to combat hate with love. She spoke of uplifting families and communities, positing that when human lives are at stake, the issue transcends all other concerns. However, this narrative creates a glaring omission. In the rush to dismantle enforcement agencies, there is a profound and deafening silence regarding the victims of crimes committed by individuals present in the country illegally. The invocation of human lives at stake seems to apply selectively. There is no mention of Laken Riley. There is no acknowledgement of the families in Georgia or elsewhere who have been permanently fractured not by policy, but by violence perpetrated by those who bypass the legal structures of the nation. The moral high ground claimed by Stewart collapses under the weight of this hypocrisy. The refusal to speak the names of these legal citizens, while championing the cause of those who have broken the law, reveals a dissonance that many observers find impossible to ignore. Stewart further personalized her stance by referencing her wife, Marta, describing the fear of family separation and the dissection of communities. She characterized the situation as terrifying, noting that despite her wife being a legal permanent resident, the climate feels precarious. This assertion, however, invites a cold, logical rebuttal. A legal permanent resident acts within the boundaries of the law. The fear is misplaced, a manufactured anxiety that ignores the fundamental distinction between legal immigration and unlawful entry. If one is in possession of legal status, the threat of deportation is non-existent. The policies advocated by ICE are designed to address those who have bypassed the law, not those who have adhered to it. To conflate the two is to engage in a deception that fuels the very fear Stewart claims to oppose. The irony is palpable. We are presented with basketball players who have taken it upon themselves to dictate the legislative morality of the nation, instructing the citizenry on which laws are just and how society should conduct itself. The question arises, unbidden but necessary: what would the Republic do without the political guidance of athletes? The contagion of this ideology has spread beyond a single player. While most members of the Minnesota Lynx are currently competing elsewhere during the off-season, the organization's leadership has entrenched itself in the controversy. Nafisa Collier and Natisha Hedeman utilize social media to signal their allegiance to the movement. More aggressively, Cheryl Reeve, the coach and president of basketball operations, declared ownership of the geography with a post on X, formerly Twitter, stating, "This is my city," accompanied by the hashtag #IceOut. This performative declaration secured her place in the visual narrative of the conflict, a thumbnail in the digital history of the league's politicization. The rhetoric employed by these figures escalates rapidly from policy disagreement to hyperbole. DiJonai Carrington, writing on Instagram, urged her followers not to become desensitized to what she termed mass ICE criminals murdering people on the streets of America. She framed the issue as a battle for the human conscience, suggesting that to lose this sensitivity is to lose one's humanity. This language paints a picture of state-sponsored violence that bears little resemblance to the operational reality of immigration enforcement. It is a narrative constructed to evoke emotional revulsion rather than to describe actual governance. This distortion of reality is what compels the counter-argument. There is a profound sickness in the conscience not when laws are enforced, but when the suffering of citizenry is ignored to service a political aesthetic. The commentator Tyrese Halliburton is mentioned in this breath, though the specifics of his involvement are bypassed to maintain focus on the core absurdity of the moment. The situation is described as unbelievable, a descent into a surreal landscape where the protectors of the border are cast as villains and the violators as victims. A review of recent discourse reveals a stark contrast. Lists of legal Americans murdered by illegal immigrants circulate in the public sphere, a catalog of grief and preventable loss. Yet, from the women's basketball players who position themselves as paragons of stunning bravery and courage, there is not a single word. The silence is absolute. It suggests that their empathy is calibrated by ideology rather than humanity. There is nothing brave about ignoring the suffering of one's own countrymen to curry favor with a political trend. The argument returns to the fundamental principles of sovereignty and law. If an individual is present in the country legally, there is no cause for alarm. The anxiety expressed by Stewart and others is a phantom. For months, the counter-narrative has been clear and consistent. Return to the country of origin and enter through the legal channels. The failure to do so lies with the individual, not the enforcement agency. The question of why these individuals have not left voluntarily is rhetorical. The onus of their presence remains their own. The disconnect between the players and the communities they claim to represent is vast. The citizens of Minnesota, the people actually living in the neighborhoods these players are shilling for, likely do not share the luxury of this performative outrage. They are concerned with safety, with law, and with the stability of their communities, stability that is undermined by the very policies the players advocate for. There is an awareness that this direct confrontation, this calling out of the league's stars and coaches, may alienate fellow content creators. There is a sense that a line has been crossed, But the crossing of that line is a deliberate act of defiance. After 6 years of rigorous work, of building a platform dedicated to exposing the uncomfortable truths beneath the surface of sports media, there is no room for capitulation. The WNBA and its players chose to wade into these waters. They chose to transform the court into a pulpit. In doing so, they invited the critique. They pulled the commentary into their orbit, not the other way around. The channel remains primarily dedicated to sports. The analysis of athletic performance, of wins and losses, remains the bedrock of the content. However, when the league insists on merging play with politics, the response must address both. The players will be held accountable for their statements with the same rigor applied to their jump shots. The silence that they offer to the victims of crime will be met with the noise of objective criticism. This is a request for engagement, not passive consumption. The audience is invited to weigh in, to critique, and to solidify their presence through subscription. The algorithms of platforms like YouTube are fickle, often unsubscribing viewers without consent, acting as a subtle censor of dissenting voices. It is imperative to check the status of one's connection to the channel. This is not a plea to those who are easily triggered or those who flee from difficult conversations. It is a call to those who value the unvarnished reality of the situation. The narrative of the WNBA's record-breaking season is inextricably potentially marred by this ideological conflict. The unprecedented growth fueled by Caitlin Clark brings with it a responsibility to the audience, a responsibility to respect the diversity of thought within that swelling fan base. Instead, the leadership and prominent players have chosen to alienate a significant portion of their new patrons by labeling opposition to illegal immigration as hate. They have drawn a line in the sand, demanding adherence to a specific political dogma as the price of admission to their moral universe. It is a high-stakes gamble. The business of sports relies on the unified enthusiasm of the crowd, a collective suspension of the outside world in favor of the drama on the court. By shattering that suspension, by dragging the divisive realities of border policy into the arena, figures like Stewart, Reeve, and Carrington risk fracturing the very foundation they are trying to build. They are prioritizing the signal of virtue over the sustainability of the sport. The message is clear. The critique will not fade. As long as the rhetoric of abolish ICE shares space with the scoreboard, the analysis will remain dual-tracked. The celebration of athletic achievement will not serve as a shield against the scrutiny of political hypocrisy. The fans who came for the basketball, the fans like me, refuse to be lectured to. They refuse to accept the premise that enforcing the law is an act of evil or that the safety of American families is secondary to the comfort of those who have broken the law. We stand at the end of the broadcast, but the conversation is far from over. The season approaches, and with it, the certainty of continued friction. The players have spoken, the coaches have tweeted, and now the response has been registered. Until the next time, the vigilance remains constant. Peace is the goal, but truth is the requirement.